I have an Iranian friend who the other day said to me that the big difference between Ahmadinejad and Rouhani is exactly the same as the difference between Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. It's a different bottle. It's basically the same stuff, but it comes wrapped a bit differently. And I think really the whole discussion of Rouhani, it's always the wrong question. When people say, is Rouhani a moderate? Does he represent something new in Iranian politics? Are we on the verge of fundamental change in Iran and so on? It's the wrong question. It's like the question of, I don't know, pick your favorite successor to the previous dictator in the Soviet Union. You get a new, remember, who was it? Who was the jazz fan? Chernyenko, was it? Andropov, right. Like jazz. I remember a big story in New York Times. This man likes jazz, therefore he must be good. But it doesn't matter who the person is, because you're dealing with the system. You're dealing with the regime. The regime has certain core principles. They believe in those core principles. They have a policy. The policy is to destroy the West, above all the United States. That's what they've been doing since 1979. And presidents come and go. There's only one supreme leader at a time. The supreme leader didn't change as a result of these elections. I must say, I differ somewhat from some of the people who follow Iran. I don't believe that with Rouhani you got some cunning scheme from the regime to put an apparent moderate of a pretty face in the presidency in order to gull us and trick us into negotiating for yet another year or two and have them buy even more time to develop nuclear weapons and carry out their evil schemes around the world and so on. I mean, they're quite capable. Even Ahmadinejad was quite capable of buying endless time, because we always fall for it. We always go for it. And so, I mean, I believe that Khamenei was rather surprised that Rouhani won the election. I think the vote was actually, insofar as it's possible in that country, an honest vote. And I think that he is not the person that Khamenei wanted. Khamenei wanted Jalili or somebody much closer to him who has worked with him over the years and so on. But it doesn't matter. I mean, the president can come and go. Policies will not change. So notice a few things. Rouhani's background. Rouhani, for years, was an important member of the National Security Council. Fully committed, fully engaged in the two things that interest us most, the nuclear program and the terror war against us. So all those various terrorist organizations, Hezbollah, Quds Force, so forth. He's fully engaged in all of that and has been fully engaged in that all along. And the second main issue is the treatment of Iranian citizens. And there, we must never forget what Sharansky says about evaluating regimes. Look at the regime, he says. The way they treat their own people is the way they want to treat us. So and since Rouhani was elected, the tempo of executions in Iran has increased considerably. And it has increased considerably not because someone or other decided, you know, we ought to kill more Iranians. No, because they're worried. They're frightened. The greatest threat to Iran in the world today is not what they talk about publicly. They don't dare talk about it. The greatest threat to Iran is the Iranian people. They know that the Iranian people, if given their druthers, if they had the opportunity, and if they had even a modicum of support from the outside world, what the Iranian people want is what the Egyptian people just did to the Muslim Brotherhood. They want them out, they want them in jail, they want a free country, they want to choose their own leaders, they want to have a greater degree of freedom than what they have. And the Iranian opposition, unlike the opposition in many countries, and I'll get to Syria in a minute, because it's what you all want to talk about this morning anyway. And we will talk about it. Unlike much of the opposition in many countries in that part of the world, the Iranian opposition is fundamentally pro-Western and anti-Islamist. And if you look at the leaders of the Green Movement, which is the biggest agglomeration of the Iranian opposition, you will see that that they are under house arrest. The regime does not dare either put them on trial or execute them, because they know that they have huge following among the Iranian people, and to move against them would be very dangerous for the regime and would risk precipitating the sort of thing that happened in Egypt. And they're afraid of that. Okay. So Rouhani, he's Pepsi-Cola instead of Coca-Cola, or Coca-Cola instead of Pepsi-Cola. He's more charming. He, unlike Ahmadinejad, knows the West. He went to school in the United States. Footnote, it's interesting to keep a running tally of anti-American foreign leaders who studied in the United States and ask ourselves the question, why do we bring all these people here? And where are we sending them to school? And what are they being taught? And how come so many of them, go to some of our best universities, come study here, learn to hate us? I mean, the man who founded the Muslim Brotherhood, the leader of the whole thing, too, he learned to hate America in America. And the turning point in his life, if you read this book, is when he went to a square dance, I think in the Middle West someplace, Iowa or Indiana, and so on, so horrified at this display of lasciviousness and so on, that he said, well, from these people you get nothing but evil and corruption, and went back and has taught his people ever since. Okay. So don't be gulled by all the talk about personality. Personality in this case doesn't matter. He's a killer like all the rest of them. He's committed to destroying us like all the rest of them. His face is prettier. He speaks English. He will charm a lot of us. He's fun to watch. He's a great actor. He's a great performer. But that regime is not going to change. Either you have it or you don't. And unfortunately, we still do. Okay, so Iran and Syria. Here's the situation we're in, as I understand it. Every serious analyst, almost without exception, grants that Syria today is under virtual Iranian control. The war within Syria, on the side of the regime, is being waged fundamentally in first position by Iran. The key fighters are a member of Quds Force, which is the Revolutionary Guard, and Hezbollah, which is the creation of the Iranian regime, created by Iran, funded by Iran, armed by Iran, trained by Iran, and given orders by Iran. And when you see these various things happening, Hezbollah does this, Quds Force does that, just keep reminding yourselves, that's terror. So if you want to affect the outcome of the war in Syria, you've got to deal with Iran. And the road to Damascus starts in Tehran, because it's Iran that's in charge, it's Iran that's doing the key fighting, it's Iran that's responsible for most of this. In my opinion, there is no way, if these stories of the use of chemical weapons are true, there is no way that that happened without minimum Iranian approval, and in all likelihood, Iranian instructions to do it, and to do it there, and to do it there. I mean, there are stories, I always cringe at quoting sources like this, but Saudi press has stories claiming that the rockets that were used in the chemical attack were Iranian, and they had photographs of them. Well, anybody can falsify a photograph nowadays, but in any case, Iran's in it. Iran is a part of it. And without Iran supporting Assad, I think there's little doubt that Assad wouldn't be there today. He would not have survived. He survives because of Iran in first position and Russia in second position. So if we were serious about our announced objective, namely bringing down the Assad regime, we would have to have an Iran policy. Because if you go after the regime in Tehran and you either paralyze it or bring it down, Assad will fall. But what Khamenei has said to his own people, and this just shows you how important this whole thing is, he has said to them, no limit either on budget or on range of action. To save Assad, we must save Assad. Assad must be preserved. Why? Because if Assad falls, it's a terrible blow to Iran, just as if Khamenei falls, it's the end of Assad. So those two things are linked. It's impossible to deal effectively with the Syria question without dealing effectively with Iran. Our risk today is that we are going to repeat the same mistake we made in 2003 with Iraq. We wanted to wage war against terrorism. That meant fighting against a terror network of various organizations, some Sunnis, some Shiites, some Arabs, some non-Arab, and so forth, and against the countries that supported them. That was our announced objective. Had we been serious about that, that meant that the primary objective of our action in 2003 had to be Iran, only secondarily Iraq. Iran is the key to international terror. Iran is the world's greatest supporter of terrorism. Was then, is now. Even the State Department will tell you that every year when they do their survey. And in Iran, the case of Iran, we didn't need to send armies. All we needed to do was to support the opposition. We changed them, and we've seen it various times. We saw it in 2003 when there was a general strike building in Iran, and Colin Powell said we wouldn't support it, we wouldn't help it, we wouldn't have anything to do with it, and it collapsed. And again in 2009, when you had demonstrations in the streets of the major cities of Iran that were bigger than the demonstrations at the time of the fall of the Shah. And Obama, as we all know, supported the regime against the Iranian people. But they are still there, they still hate the regime. And support for them would still have an enormous impact, and in all likelihood, in my opinion, bring down the Iranian regime, and thereby make all these other problems much more manageable. Because without the Revolutionary Guards and Hezbollah, what does Assad have to defend? So that's where we are. I think that's the right context in which to look at it, and I eagerly await John's wise words.